Hello, welcome to lesson 1D. I can identify angle pair relations. So in this lesson, we're actually going to look at a couple of different ways that angles can relate in a diagram. And our first type we're going to look at are adjacent angles. Now, if you've ever used the word adjacent before, would be in things like adjacent neighbors. So if we say the person adjacent to you, mean the person next to you. Well, it's the same thing in geometry. If we say an adjacent angle, it's an angle that is next to the angle you're talking about. So this diagram up here actually has 4 pairs of adjacent angles. And adjacent simply means that they are coplanar, they have a common vertex, okay? They have exactly one common side, and they have no common interior points. So informally, we say that adjacent angles are side by side but don't overlap. So for example, angle 1 and angle 4 are adjacent angles because they're side by side, they don't overlap, they share a vertex, they share a side. Coming down here, this is a little bit more complicated diagram, you can actually see that whether or not angles are adjacent has no bearing on whether or not they're congruent to each other or supplementary or anything at all. If you're adjacent, the only thing you can say is that they share a vertex, they share a side, and they don't overlap. That's all we know. We know nothing about their actual measurements. So let's look at our pairs of adjacent angles here. Looking here, I see angle 1 and angle 2 are adjacent. Well, angle 2 and angle 3 are also adjacent. And angle 3 and angle 4. And angle 4 and angle 5. And last but not least, angle 5 and angle 1, right? These guys right here. So, adjacent angles are great. Another type of significant angle pair relationship are vertical angles. You've used the word vertical before to mean things that are up and down from each other. So we talk about the y-axis being a vertical axis, or to talk about vertical shifts in graphs. Well, vertical angles are angles that are colloquially, we would say, across from each other. I would say, looking at this graph up here, that angle 1 and angle 4 are vertical angles. So these guys are vertical angles because they're formed by the same two lines intersecting. So this line and this line make up the sides of angle 1 and angle 4. They're the only vertical angles in this diagram because any other angle pair isn't formed by the same two lines intersecting. So angle 5 and angle 2 are not vertical angles because while one side, so with 5, this side forms one side of each of them, but angle 5's other side is from this line here, and angle 2's other side is from this line here, so they're not vertical angles. Next page. So we would say that two angles are vertical angles if and only if their sides together form intersecting lines. So guys, this is a great thing to throw into your vocab page, right? It's your vocab. This is different from the meaning of the word vertical, which actually has nothing to do with up and down, but it is easy for us to do things with it. So now, looking at this diagram right here, we actually have two pairs of vertical angles. My first pair is AEB and DEC. So angle AEB and angle DEC are vertical angles. It's also cool, vertical angles are also always congruent, which we're going to discuss a little bit more in the next lesson, but vertical angles will always have the same measurement. Similarly, another pair of vertical angles would be AED and BEC. So angle AED and angle BEC are vertical angles. All right, our next type of relationship are linear pairs. So linear, there's that word line again showing up, right? Well, a linear pair is a pair of adjacent angles. Again, adjacent means side by side next to each other. They share a common vertex, common side. Adjacent angles that form a straight angle. And as we learned from middle school and then reviewed again this year, A straight angle basically is an angle that's 180 degrees. So if that guy there is a straight angle. These two angles then must be supplementary because they form a straight line. So let's take a look at our actual definition. Angles AOB and BOC form a linear pair if and only if AOB and BOC are adjacent and AOC is a straight angle. So let's actually draw that. So I've got a straight angle AOC. I'm going to draw him first. So here's AOC. And AOB and BOC are adjacent. So AO, I'm going to call this guy over here B, and then BOC make adjacent angles. So do you see how these two angles together form a straight line? That's what makes a linear pair. Well, let's take a look at our diagram down here. Angle 5 and angle 1 form a linear pair. So right here, these guys, we're making a straight line. They're adjacent angles. So therefore, we know that the measure of angle 5 plus the measure of angle 1 will equal 180 degrees. And we know that 5 and 1 are supplementary because they form a linear pair. Now, angles 1, 2, and 3 are not a linear pair because, namely, they're not a pair. 3 angles cannot be a linear pair because it's 3 as opposed to 2. However, we do know that measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 plus measure of angle 3 will still equal 180 degrees. We just don't consider them a linear pair. Now, there is another linear pair in this diagram, and it's right here with 5 and 4. Angle 5 and angle 4 are a linear pair because, again, they form a straight angle together and they're adjacent. They share this side right here. So the measure of angle 5 plus the measure of angle 4 will equal 180 degrees. All right, now this is some major flashback for you guys, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. You learned about supplementary and complementary angles in middle school, but you've probably forgotten which one's which, so we're going to talk about it right now. Complementary angles are angle pairs whose measures sum to 90 degrees. Angles do not have to be adjacent to be complementary, they just have to add to 90 degrees. So looking at these two diagrams down here, I can see that LMN and QPO are complementary because when I add their measures together, these guys will sum to 90 degrees, despite the fact that they are super funky looking and they're not attached and they're not adjacent, they're still complementary. And then over here, angle 1 and angle 2 are also complementary. They just happen to also be adjacent. And they share a vertex. So that's so complementary means adds to 90, but it doesn't mean anything else. Similarly, supplementary angles are angles that add to 180 degrees. So looking down here, angle 7 and angle 6 are a linear pair. That means they're adjacent, they form a straight angle, and so they're supplementary because they add to 180 degrees. Whereas below, my second example, UVW and XYZ, those two angles are supplementary, but they're not a linear pair because they're not adjacent. They don't share a common side. So we can say that they're supplementary because they add to 180, but we cannot say they're a linear pair. So just a couple little details there for y'all to remember. Okay, guys, that is the end of lesson 1D. Thank you very much, and take a look at the MML work. Have a great day.